Margaret Hayes had called this house a sanctuary for over 50 years, a place where every creak of the floorboards was a familiar friend. But tonight, the silence of Oakhaven was broken by a sound that made her heart hammer against her ribs, a heavy, deliberate step in the upstairs hallway, followed by a chilling, muffled whisper. Her high-tech security cameras had been remotely disabled, the phone lines were severed, and the heavy oak front door was still bolted from the inside. That is when the terrifying reality set in. They didn't break in while she was sleeping. They were already hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Stay with me until the very end, because Margaret is about to discover that the greatest threat isn't lurking in the woods outside, but is standing right behind her in the dark corners of her own living room. The storm raging outside was violent with thunder that shook the foundations of the old house. But even the crashing rain couldn't drown out the sound of a heavy wooden chair dragging slowly across the floorboards, directly above her head. Margaret sat motionless in her darkened kitchen, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The porcelain rattled against the saucer with each involuntary shake of her fingers. She was supposed to be alone in this house, but every shadow that flickered in the corner of her eye seemed to take a human shape, and every breath she took felt like it was being watched by unseen eyes. The house had been built in 1923, a wedding gift from her late husband's grandfather. Margaret knew every inch of it, the loose board in the hallway that squeaked when you stepped on it, the window in the guest room that never quite closed properly, the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of Ireland. She knew the rhythm of this house, the way a musician knows their instrument, and that's how she knew with absolute certainty that the footsteps upstairs were not the settling of old wood or the expansion of pipes. Someone was walking through her bedroom, someone who knew exactly where to step to avoid the creaky floorboards. If you have ever had that bone-chilling feeling that you weren't truly alone in an empty house, you need to subscribe to this channel right now. We bring you the most intense, heart-pounding stories of survival and dark mystery every single week. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a chapter of Margaret's journey. Margaret reached for an old, heavy metal flashlight, her fingers fumbling with the switch. The batteries were weak. She'd been meaning to replace them for weeks, but the beams still cut through the darkness, though it flickered ominously. As the weak beam of light cut through the kitchen's gloom, she flashed back to the strange man she had encountered at the grocery store earlier that afternoon. The one with the cold, calculating eyes who had stared just a few seconds too long at the brass keys hanging from her belt. He'd been standing in the produce section, not shopping, just watching. When Margaret had made eye contact, he'd smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile that said he knew something she didn't. She'd felt a chill then, but dismissed it as paranoia. Now, as another footstep echoed from above, she wondered if her instincts had been trying to warn her. As she stood in the dark, she realized her environment had subtly changed. The air felt heavy, charged with the ozone of the storm, and something else, the metallic tang of fear. She remembered the secret compartment in the kitchen pantry, the one her husband had built during the height of the Cold War. It wasn't for food. It was for the ledger that proved the town's founding families hadn't built Oakhaven on industry, but on blood money. Was that what they wanted? Or was it the box upstairs? Was he the one upstairs? Or was this something far more personal? A ghost from a past she had spent 4 decades trying to bury under the floorboards. The thought sent ice through her veins. There were only 3 people in the world who knew about what was hidden in this house. One was dead, one was in prison, and the third had promised her 40 years ago that they would come back for it someday. As she slowly approached the basement stairs, a sudden, icy breeze brushed against her face, smelling of damp earth and old secrets. It was the smell of disturbed soil, of things that had been buried and were now being unearthed. The basement door, which she always kept locked, had kept locked every single day for the past 40 years, was standing wide open, swinging gently on its hinges. The old brass padlock hung broken on the floor, its shackle cleanly cut with bolt cutters that had left fresh metal shavings scattered on the hardwood. Margaret's mind raced. They'd come prepared. They knew about the lock. They knew about the basement. They knew exactly what they were looking for. The shadows seemed to lengthen as she stared into the abyss of the stairs. She could hear a rhythmic thumping from below, like a second heart beating in the chest of the house. It wasn't just footsteps anymore. It was the sound of a crowbar prying up the concrete floor she had poured with her own hands in 1982. Stepping into the dining room, she finally saw them. 3 tall figures were standing perfectly still in the center of the room, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning from the windows. They weren't moving, weren't speaking, just standing there like statues, waiting for her to notice them. The lightning flashed again, and Margaret's breath caught in her throat. They were wearing grotesque masks that had been crudely painted to mimic Margaret's own elderly face. Her face, but distorted, the wrinkles exaggerated into deep crevices. the eyes hollow and dead, the mouth twisted into a grimace. It was like looking at her own corpse, animated and multiplied. The masks were handmade, personal. Someone had studied her face closely enough to recreate it in papier-mâché and paint. They weren't there for her jewelry, her television, or the small amount of cash in her purse. Those things sat untouched on the hallway table, right where she'd left them. They had walked past valuables without a second glance. They had come for the heavy iron box hidden beneath the loose floorboards in the study. A box that Margaret hadn't touched or spoken of since the winter of 1974. A box that contained something worth more than money, something worth killing for. One of the masked figures tilted its head slowly, mechanically, like a predator studying prey. Through the mouth hole of the mask, Margaret could see lips moving, forming silent words she couldn't quite read in the darkness. The figure raised a hand, pointing a long, gloved finger toward the ceiling. They weren't looking for the box anymore. They were indicating that they knew she had moved it. They were playing with her. A cruel game of cat and mouse in a house that was supposed to be her fortress. Imagine the horror of seeing your own face staring back at you from the darkness of your own home. If this story is giving you chills, type "scary" in the comments below to let us know you're brave enough to see how this ends. But the intruders had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated Margaret Hayes. She didn't scream for help, and she didn't try to run into the storm. Running would be pointless. She knew that. The storm had knocked out power to half the county. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away down a washed-out road. Help wasn't coming. She was on her own. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, unmarked remote control. It was black, smooth, about the size of a car key fob. She'd carried it with her every day for 40 years, waiting for this moment, hoping it would never come, but knowing deep down that it would. She thought of the years she had spent preparing, the quiet modifications made to the ventilation, the reinforced walls hidden behind floral wallpaper. She wasn't just a victim, she was the architect of their doom. They thought they had trapped an old woman, but they had walked into a tomb. With a single, firm click, the house entered a total security lockdown. Reinforced steel shutters slammed over every window and door with a deafening metallic crash that echoed through the house like thunder. A system she had installed years ago for a day she knew would eventually come. The shutters were military-grade, designed to withstand forced entry and small arms fire. Once they were down, nothing short of industrial cutting equipment could open them, and she was the only one with the override code. The hunters had suddenly become the prey, trapped in a cage with a woman who had nothing left to lose. The 3 figures spun toward the windows, then the doors, realizing too late what had happened. One of them rushed to the front door, pulling at the handle, then pounding on the steel shutter. The sound was dull, muffled. No one outside would hear it over the storm. Margaret stepped out of the shadows, her voice steady and low, and whispered, "I've been waiting 40 years for you to come back for that box. I hope you're ready to see what's actually inside." The center figure slowly pulled off the mask, revealing a face Margaret knew well, a face she'd seen in her nightmares for 4 decades. It was the face of the man she thought she had killed in self-defense all those years ago. He wasn't a ghost. He was a living reminder of the sin that had built her life. And in that moment, surrounded by the storm and the locked house, and the terrible secrets about to be revealed, Margaret smiled, because she'd been planning this moment for 40 years. The iron box didn't contain treasure, it contained a pressure-sensitive trigger, and by prying it open in the basement, they had already activated the final countdown. Everything was going exactly according to plan. Sometimes, the people we think are the most vulnerable are actually the ones guarding the darkest secrets of all. If you enjoyed this heart-stopping twist, please leave a like and share this video with a friend who loves a high-stakes thriller. Click the video appearing on your screen right now to dive into Margaret's next mystery. I'll see you in the next story.